Thank you all for coming. Thank you for caring enough about your country to come to a meeting like this to learn what's really going on. Well, I usually start these meetings by asking for all of you that are non-members, raise your hand.
Most.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Most.
The doors will now be locked until you visit the table up here after the meeting. No, we're not really that nasty. The door's open in the back to get some ventilation. We'll probably open that door to get some ventilation as well. At the end of the meeting, Nigel will stay here, and he will be selling his book, Fighting Bull, for 10 pounds, and the world-famous damp rag tea towel that was infamous or famous, depending on your point of view, when Nigel had worked with Mr. Van Rompuy. He will be signing these and the book if you so choose. This will be 5 pounds, that's 10 pounds. So we'll be sitting up here doing that. In the table here is other various merchandise, which includes a booklet for the real cost of the EU. The gentleman over here, who came all the way from Oregon in the States, actually he and his wife are visiting in Chichester, in Christchurch, will be filming this, and they have a DVD here of our conference in Eastbourne for 2 pounds each, if anybody is interested in that. There's also some cigarette lighters and some pens and a cup, a mug that will change into a funny thing when we get some hot water to put in it, which we'll do after the question time. All of you have signed in here when you came in, members or non-members, and I think it's time to get started. Many of you will know that the speaker needs no introduction. In the future, when they talk about this period of time, one of the things is going to be UKIP and Nigel's main achievement to date is changing the political debate in this country. 5, 10 years ago, 7 years ago, people didn't talk about leaving the EU in polite society or even in impolite society. It just wasn't done. Now, every meeting we've had, and this is the 7th in a series, has been filled to capacity. And it's filled to capacity mainly because of the man you're about to listen to. Nigel Farage.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Can you hear me clearly at the back? Yes. Right, we'll try and do without. I find microphones always go wrong, so I'll try and do it without. My day started this morning in Jutland, because the last meeting I spoke at was in Denmark. And that was at a Eurosceptic Party conference yesterday afternoon, and there were 1,000 Danes in the room. And you know, the fascinating thing is that for so many years, people thought, well, this UKIP group, they must be anti-European. And I want to just, if anyone's come along tonight expecting to hear me slag off Europe and the European peoples and to tell you that south of Calais everything's absolutely appalling and we should never have anything to do with the European people, well, I'm sorry, you're in for a big disappointment. Because, as I've often said, I'm married to a German. I've worked for 2 French companies. They did both sack me, but I'm trying not to bear a grudge. And I've drunk more Rioja than most people standing up in Britain today. I love Europe. I love the continent of Europe. I want to go there on holiday. I want us to trade with them. I want us to be friendly with them. I want us to be good next-door neighbours with them. Although I know with the French that'll be tricky from time to time. But I do not wish to be governed by the institutions of the European Union, because I believe the best and the only people to govern our country should be the British people themselves through their own parliament. It's as simple as that. Yeah. And right across Europe, in Denmark, where I was yesterday, in Finland, in the Netherlands, right across Europe, the peoples of Europe are saying the same thing. They want their own countries, they want their own identities, they want their own democracies, because that is literally what has been stolen from them. Their democracy. And when you think, and perhaps there are one or two old enough in this room to remember, but when you think that twice in the 20th century, this country went to war to defend the principle of democracy, not just for us, but for other European countries too. When you think of the price that those that went before us paid for us to live in a free country, to have freedom of speech, to have the ability to govern ourselves, when you think of the gravity of that, then I think what has been done to us, not by wicked Europeans, but by our own elected politicians in Westminster. They're the ones that have given this country away. They lied to us back at the time of the common market. They're still lying to us when they promised us again and again they'll give us a referendum and then don't deliver. They are the people, frankly, who I think are the enemies of Britain, are the enemies of the British people, and that is why UKIP is here. We are here to fight. We want to get our country back. We want to make sure that our children and grandchildren enjoy the same privileges, the same freedom and the same democracy that we've enjoyed in our lives. But it hasn't been an easy run to get to where we are today. And I speak as somebody who was a founder member of this organisation, and they did their best. The politicians, the BBC, they did their best to ignore us in the early days, to pretend we didn't really exist. But when we started to raise the radar screen, they decided that the next best thing was to mock us and abuse us. So we've been called cranks, gadflies, eccentrics, extremists. My favourite one was fruitcakes. I mean, every form of possible abuse has been thrown at this party, thrown at its leaders, and thrown at the ideals and values that we stand for. The political class, as it were, gathered together in their opposition to everything that we were trying to do. But just look at the change in national debate that we've seen just in the last 3 months. People like Max Hastings last week in the Daily Mail, a double-page spread, why I've been wrong. And actually, I admire him, because it takes courage, doesn't it? It takes courage for somebody to publicly say they've got it wrong. Simon Jenkins in The Guardian, again, another mea culpa, why I've been wrong. And now we also have a variety of backbench members of Parliament, both from Labour and Conservative, who are beginning to say the things, perhaps rather similar things, to those that you're going to hear this evening. And my advice to you on those people is tread carefully, but I'll come back to that later on in the speech. Now, the fact is that all of the things that we've said, and we haven't just talked about Europe, we've talked about immigration into this country, we've talked about declining educational standards, we've talked about the total failure, absolute failure, of law and order in this country. We've talked about many of the things that symbolise and signify why this country has been going downhill. But all of those things can no longer be written off as being mad or eccentric. Everything UKIP stands for is now absolutely at the centre of the mainstream debate in this country. No longer will anybody ever tell you that UKIP is a fringe party. We are a mainstream political party. In 2009, in the last European elections, we came second across the entire United Kingdom, beating not just the Lib Dems, but beating the governing Labour Party of the day. But our job now is to move this party on from being something that was perhaps a protest vehicle in European elections to being a party that people want to support, help and vote for in local government, in national government and in all forms of election. I think that if we hadn't been here, if we hadn't made the argument that we shouldn't be part of this union respectable, if we hadn't claimed back the argument about immigration from the BNP and the English Defence League and all of those people, you know, we're the people that have actually changed the national debate in this country, and I'm very proud of it. And my goodness me, isn't there a loss of faith in our politicians? You know, our career political class. Now, I regularly deride our political class because as far as I'm concerned, they look the same, they sound the same. On issues of real substance, frankly, you can't put a cigarette paper between them. And we've literally been taken over by a group of college kids. None of them have ever had a job. None of them have served in the army, set up a business, run a charity, been a trade union leader. Think back just 30 or 40 years, Parliament was full of giants, wasn't it? Full of men and women who'd really achieved in their lives before they became part of the national debate. Career politics has taken over. And with career politics, what matters more than anything else to them is, of course, their career. Because most of them wouldn't get a job out there on Main Street. So keeping re-elected is actually rather important. And of course, if you are a career politician, then the best thing that's ever happened to you is called the European Union. Because provided that you state publicly that you believe in all its doings, you are virtually guaranteed a job for life. Many of our MEPs are people who lost their jobs as MPs. The retreads, I call them. They're not very keen on it, but never mind. I haven't let upsetting the odd person worry me too much over the years. You may have noticed that. So you have MPs who now become MEPs. You have former cabinet ministers who, of course, now become commissioners. And I did have to commiserate yesterday with the people of Denmark because a terrible thing happened to Denmark on Thursday. If you don't know, they now have a member of the Kinnock family as their Prime Minister, and they have my commiserations. But you see, when I talk about career politicians, those of you that can remember the '75 referendum will remember that Kinnock was a prominent player in the No campaign, wasn't he? Kinnock was the man saying that it would be bad for our democracy, bad for jobs, it would drive down the wages of those at the bottom of our society. But Kinnock very quickly took the pieces of silver, did 2 terms as a commissioner, his wife became an MEP, and his son and his daughter both got jobs in those agencies and organisations. A classic example of what I'm talking about, of career mattering more than country. Well, I think to some extent they've been rumbled, because the loss of faith in Labour is clear, isn't it? I mean, Blair, well, fantastic spin machine. You know, things can only get better. I mean, it all sounded wonderful, didn't it? But what did Blair do to us? I mean, Blair lied to us again and again, took us into a series of endless foreign wars, most of which did not actually serve our national interest, it seemed to me, in any way at all. And of course he appointed a Chancellor, who then succeeded him, who has left our public finances in just the most disastrous state. We can comfort ourselves, folks, that we're outside the euro, and it's good that we are. But please don't think that just because we're out of the euro, that all is fine and dandy with our economy, because it isn't. And I also think that the public have lost faith in Labour's ability to govern the country. You know, it isn't just that he sold 400 metric tons of gold at $278 an ounce. I mean, that in itself was a crime enough, but it was the fact that he announced to the market the 17 separate auctions and how much he was going to sell on what date. So if you now look at an historic chart of gold going back 100 years, there is now a pronounced dip which is known in professional trading circles as the brown bottom, but enough of that. So I'm sorry about that. I will try and keep it clean, folks, I promise. So I do think that the public's faith in Labour has gone and won't return for many years. And as far as the Lib Dems are concerned, you know, they really got away with it for many years because they were the plague on both your houses vote. We're voting Lib Dem because we can't stand the big two. And when you ask people what the Lib Dems actually stood for, no one knew. Well, now we're beginning to find out. Much as I socially quite like Vince Cable and find him an amusing chap to have a drink with, it is remarkable, isn't it, that we now have a business secretary who appears to actually hate business and want to close them all down. And we have an energy secretary, the ever-ambitious, rather local member of Parliament, of course, from up the road in Eastleigh, Christopher Hoon, who is intent on despoiling as much of our landscape and our seashores as he possibly can with a project of building windmills, which means that the average family has about £300 a year extra put on their electricity bill, whilst David Cameron's father-in-law gets 350 grand a year for having wind turbines on his land, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg's wife, is a board director of the biggest Spanish wind farm company. You know, I think people are realising that actually what the Lib Dems stand for isn't so good. But they've also realised that the Lib Dems, above all, support the whole European project, and that the Lib Dems can't be trusted more than anybody else because their breach of promise over tuition fees, frankly, has meant that trust in them has snapped like an elastic band. And that is why, currently, in the north of England, in London, and amongst 18 to 24-year-olds in this country, UKIP is now the third party above the Lib Dems and climbing higher all the time. So I'm very pleased with that. Very pleased with that. But the biggest loss of faith in British politics is only just beginning. For 13 years, in fact, almost for the entire existence of UKIP as a party, we had the Tories in opposition. So people would say, thank God you're there, Nigel. We're delighted someone is standing up for the country. We admire what you do. And I'd say, well, that's very nice of you, thank you. Are you going to vote for us? Oh, no, they'd say. Oh, no, we can't vote for you because we want to get Labour out. And that means we have to vote Tory, and that's more important to us. And they used to tell me, just you wait till David gets in. Oh, yeah. Just you wait till David gets in. And David was very good, wasn't he? Very good, actually, in a Blair-like way. Anyone ever see that famous Private Eye cover? There was a photograph of Tony Blair, photograph next to it of David Cameron, and the headline was, World's First Successful Face Transplant. I think that said quite a lot. But wasn't Cameron brilliant? You know, I went to a military dinner that he spoke at, a regiment that my father's involved with, and Cameron stood up and said, when the Tories are back in, you can rest assured that the British Armed Forces will be looked after and be secure. And people believed it. And when he went to the various hunt meets that take place in Oxfordshire, he told them, when the Tories are in, we'll repeal the ban. Hunting is a matter of personal conscience, not a matter for the government. And he told us before the election that when a Tory government was in, we'd sweep away the whole human rights European legislation and have a British Bill of Rights. And he told us that he would reduce immigration in this country from its current hundreds of thousands a year to tens of thousands a year. But perhaps the biggest porky of all, and I'm suggesting to you, by the way, not that he hasn't kept these promises, I'm suggesting to you he never meant them in the first place. that he said these things purely as a means of getting votes. Now, the biggest porky of all was, of course, published in the Sun newspaper in 2008. How many Sun readers in the room? Hands up. Oh, come on, there's more than that. There always is. A lot of these chaps don't tell the truth, you know. And he wrote in the Sun newspaper in 2008, I give you this cast iron guarantee that when I'm Prime Minister, you will get a referendum on our relationship. Well, now, in 4 interviews that I can count, he has been asked the question, shouldn't the British people have a referendum so that they can decide their future? And his answer on 4 occasions has been no, because I think Britain's interests are best served by staying part of the European Union. So what he is saying is, damn you, I know how you'd vote. I don't trust you to be able to make that decision. I have decided what your future is. And I think all of us in this room will know patriotic, Eurosceptic, traditional Conservative voters, and now a year into this government, it isn't good enough just to blame the coalition. It is Cameron himself who is not prepared to put the interests of this country or the people of this country first. And that is what UKIP is doing loudly and clearly. We are there, certainly loudly in my case, but there we are. We are there going up steadily in the opinion polls. And the establishment are absolutely terrified of us. I'll bet you that if any of the other 3 parties had a meeting tonight in this hall in Lyndhurst, I doubt they'd get even half the number who've turned up to this meeting tonight. It's true. They are absolutely terrified of the impact we can have. And so now what we're seeing are some people in the House of Commons breaking ranks. So we've now got Tory MPs and Labour MPs too saying, well, some say there must be a referendum. Others say we don't need a referendum, but we must regain powers. A chap today in the Telegraph, Mark Pritchard, suggested we have a referendum now and then another referendum in 2 years' time. I mean, they're all over the place. They're all over the place, but they're trying to give the impression that it's okay to stick with the Tory party. There is no need to go to UKIP. And I know from first hand that that meeting that you've read about with 120 Tory MPs in the room was in fact operated, set up and run by the Tory whips. This is a very cynical... Don't misunderstand me. There are some very good people in the Tory and Labour Party on the back benches. There aren't many of them, but there are some good people. But this big idea, there's some mass rebellion. I'm sorry, it's not a mass rebellion. They're doing it because they're terrified of UKIP. They're doing it because our arguments are winning. They're doing it because our vision of how Britain could and should be run is gaining resonance with the public. And my advice to you is not to believe these people, is not to trust these people. Why would you trust the very same people who have given away your birthright, who have given away the rights and privileges that were handed down to you? I will only trust any of them if they deliver actions and not words. You know, if David Cameron stands up and does it, fine. But it has to be actions and not words. And I think to a large extent, the domestic debate in Britain, what you're hearing from these MPs is being driven by UKIP. And I'm proud of the fact they're scared witless of us. And what I want you to do, those of you in this room tonight, those of you that agree with the things we stand for, those of you that think it is more important to put the interests of this country and the future of our children and grandchildren above any tribal loyalty to whether it's a blue rosette or a red rosette in 10 Downing Street, I ask you and I urge you to join our ever-growing bandwagon. We are only going to achieve what we want if not just we frighten them witless, but we actually start to become big enough to demand them the opportunity to have power. Only when UKIP gets as big as that will they listen to us. Only then will we get our referendum. And only when we've had that referendum will we be able to help our businesses. Will we be able to stop uncontrolled immigration into this country, which is damaging the job prospects of our young and our unskilled workers so horribly. Only then will we be able to sweep away this lunatic human rights legislation that puts the interests of the criminals above that of the victims. Only then. Only then can we do these things. As I've said before tonight, the British economy is in a mess. It is not an easy time to govern Britain. Therefore, why would you allow 75% of your laws to be made by my old mate Herman Van Rumpy Pumpy and the team in Brussels? Come on, we're better than that, aren't we? We're much better than that. Let's stand up, let's govern ourselves. Thank you. All right, Rod.
Thank you, Nigel. What we'll do now is a question and answer. As the roving microphone, and I'll pick on the people to question. For those of you that are loyal UKIP members, I'm not going to call on you. I'm going to call on the non-members, because those are the ones that we want to have the chance to get a question to Nigel and listen to his response. So please don't get angry at me, UKIP members. That is the plan. That doesn't mean it's the plan. And I'll remind you one more time after the questions, if you want to get an autographed book from Nigel or the autographed lovely tea towel, would you please sort of come over on this side and come this way so we can control it, and it'll be much faster for you. Thank you very much. First question, the gentleman there.
My name is Brian Sherrod. I live in New Milton, and I don't belong to any political party. A friend of mine bought me a book recently by my favourite author, P.J. O'Rourke. And the title of the book is Don't Vote, It Only Encourages the Bastards. Could Nigel tell us how he's different from the other bastards?
I have to say, Brian, I do a lot of public meetings. That's the best question I've been asked for a very, very long time. Well, I'm not a college kid. I was somebody that left school. I went to work in the City of London. It was the early 1980s. Thatcher was in power. We'd done away with exchange controls. We had foreign money flooding into this country, and I worked there, and it was a very exciting place to work. And my game plan for life was to try and make loads of money and perhaps retire early. And then by 1990, I realised that even the Eurosceptics in the Tory party that I'd try to support actually were a pretty spineless bunch when it came to it and wouldn't do very much. And the day we joined the exchange rate mechanism, the day we pegged sterling against the Deutschmark, I remember saying to my colleagues that this would be a disaster. I use different words, I have to say, but never mind. And that was really what got me motivated, sir. It was the realisation that the entire political class in this country was signing us up to a European agenda that I didn't believe suited us. And I believed in 1990 that not only should we govern ourselves, but in terms of our economy, we shouldn't just tie ourselves to trade with Europe, we should think globally. Because it was clear even then there'd be a global future, and I thought it was madness that we turned our backs on the Commonwealth, we turned our backs on our own kith and kin to pursue this political dream. So, whether you like everything I say or not, I make you this one promise. I am here doing this because I absolutely believe in it. I've made a massive sacrifice to do it over what is now almost 20 years. I believe in it with every fibre of my being, And you know what? I'm absolutely confident too that we are going to win. So lend us a hand, Brian. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mike Beggs, and I'm from New Forest West. Recently, our MP held a meeting in Hordle, and in fact you are exaggerating grossly to say that they would be half as many as are here. There were 12 people there, 6 of whom were Conservative councillors, and at least 2 were UKIP members. To come to my question, the EU has been very successful in breaking up the Union. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland now feel they're independent. How can UKIP get us back to UK IP?
I think that as far as okay, one of the plans of the EU has been to break up the United Kingdom, especially England, because England is now on the European maps divided up into 9 separate regions, and we tonight are in the southeast region, which goes from here all the way across to Ramsgate and up to and including 20 miles north of Banbury. You know, that is the southeast of England. Now, I don't know about you, but if you meet somebody on holiday and ask them where they come from, they don't say southeast England, they say Hampshire, don't they? Or Sussex, or Kent, or Oxfordshire, or whatever it may be. So you're right about that. However, the demand for devolution in Scotland predates even the European Union's plans. I was one of those people in 1998 that was worried about what devolution might do to the United Kingdom. Very worried about what it might do. I don't think I could have foreseen just how damaging it would have been. We now have not just the SNP in government with a big majority, but we now have Alex Salmond pursuing a deliberate policy. And the policy is to goad the English. He's very good at it. You know, I mean, if I'm listening to the Today programme and halfway through a bacon sandwich, when Salmond says the English should give us more money, I mean, I'm in trouble, you know. I'm finding this quite difficult. I feel like one of these retired colonels in Wiltshire choking on the kedgeree. You know, Salmond's very good at it. The thing that will now break up the union is the anger of the English. Because the English are getting a rotten deal. Not only do we have Scottish and Welsh and Northern Irish MPs voting on education in England, or the Hunting Act in England, or whatever else it may be, we now have the obscenity that as net recipients of English money, the Scottish say, if you come from Warsaw this September, you can be educated at Edinburgh University for free. If you come, you know, from Inverness, you can be educated at Edinburgh University for free. But if you come from the New Forest, it's £9,000 a year. And it's not good enough, and it can't last, and we have to redress the balance. And the only way that I can think of redressing that balance is to give the English the voice they deserve in a modern United Kingdom. We have to have an English Parliament to give the English equality with the Welsh and the Scots. We have to broker a financial deal that is fairer to the English and less advantageous under the Barnett formula to the Scots. We have to call Alex Salmond's bluff. And I think then, then we will live in a United Kingdom, a different one to the way that it was pre-devolution. It'll be a federal model. I mean, who thought UKIP would advocate federalism, eh? I mean, it'll be a federal model for the United Kingdom, and it will work. But I don't know about you, but everywhere I go, I get a growing sense of Englishness. Because our lords and masters don't even want us to write English on the census forms. We're supposed to be ashamed of being English, whilst we lavish Alex Salmond and the Scots with gifts and with goods. So my answer, sir, is we must recognise that the devolution genie is out of the bottle. It isn't going to be put back. And the biggest danger to the Union is the English saying, we don't want the Scots anymore. Give the English a fair deal. Let's live together in a United Kingdom with devolved powers. And what we will do in England is we will abolish the European Union's plan to divide us up into 9 separate regions with 9 separate parliaments, and we'll go back to an English parliament that votes for people on the basis of traditional English counties. That's what we'll do.
Good evening, name's Terry Hazel from Boredom, and I'm not quite sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure the exact date, but when we joined the common market, as it was known then, everybody I spoke to and everybody that you work with all said it's a no. No, everybody said no. How comes it was? Even I think all the papers said no, but we got a yes vote. Now, the Irish, not so long ago, had a vote, a no. So what do? They twist the paper upside down, add a few more questions, and take away the other answers, and then all of a sudden it becomes a no vote. Sorry, a yes vote in, which is totally wrong to what the people in Ireland wanted.
Yeah.
Now, what makes you think that if Mr Cameron never did, or if you get in power, then the first thing you do is have a referendum? What makes you believe that the answer will still be, even though we know most people would say out? What makes you think we get it?
Okay. It's a perfectly fair question. You see, 6 months before that referendum, and that was back in '75, 6 months before the referendum, actually, about a 2-to-1 majority were against the common market. But during that 6 months, everything changed. And where you're wrong, sir, where I'm going to correct you, is actually every single national newspaper in the United Kingdom in 1975 said vote yes. The BBC were biased beyond comprehension in their support of the yes vote, but it even went so far they actually sacked Jack D'Manio as a presenter of the Today programme because he was a Eurosceptic. All right? You then had almost the entire Westminster establishment, including a young female leader of the Conservative Party called Margaret Thatcher, who came out and supported the yes vote. So there was an avalanche of argument in favour of a yes vote, and perhaps crucially, all the business organisations said we must vote yes, and the no campaign was Enoch Powell and Michael Foot, and was seen to be somewhat on the extremes and somewhat fractured. All right? An awful lot has changed since 1975. We now know that the warnings of Michael Foot and Enoch Powell were actually right. We now know that Heath and Wilson and everybody deliberately lied to us. My mum and dad both voted yes. They did so because we're a business family. They bought the argument that we were going to become a bigger domestic marketplace. They bought the argument this would in no way threaten our essential national sovereignty. Do you remember all those lies? All right. 35 years on, those arguments don't wash. 35 years on, the newspapers in this country, a lot would say vote no, wouldn't they? And the Express, the Daily Express, have come out already, haven't they, as our first national newspaper saying Britain must leave this union. So well done, the Express. Well done, the Express. And the Daily Mail aren't far behind them, and today's Spectator editorial, again, marks a massive, massive shift. The Spectator today are saying exactly what UKIP are saying. We must leave political union, we must renegotiate a genuine free trade agreement, which is what we thought we'd signed up to all those years ago in '75. So the whole thing, sir, has changed, all right? So I'm absolutely confident that we would win that referendum, and David Cameron knows we'd win that referendum. It's why the so-and-so won't give it to us, all right? So that's that answer. But can I just deal with a slightly separate point? You talked about the referendum in Ireland, and I took part in both of those referendums. In fact, in the first referendum, where the no vote won, I managed to get with my colleagues together a pool of European money, believe it or not, which was designated under their information budget. Now, they thought, of course, that all MEPs would put out positive information. We chose to put the contrary argument. And we put an 8-page booklet out into every house in Ireland telling people why it made more sense to vote no than to vote yes. And one of my proudest moments in politics was the day after that referendum, the Irish Taoiseach, Brian Cowan, Biffo as he was known, I won't explain what that stands for, but he wasn't that well liked, and Brian Cowan stood up in the Irish Parliament in Dublin the day after the no vote, and he said, Nigel Farage and a group of extremists in the Strasbourg Parliament have hijacked Irish democracy. And I thought, yes, please. I'm very, very happy with that. But it wasn't just them, was it? Because the French voted no. The Dutch voted no. They ignored them and they rebranded it from the Constitution to the Lisbon Treaty. And my point, sir, is this. What you're going to hear over the next year or two, as this chorus of voices attempts to diminish UKIP from the whole national argument, what you will hear, even Cleggy will do it, what you'll hear is the argument that the EU suffers from a problem, that it's undemocratic. But if we change it and shape it and bend it, it'll all be okay. The EU, folks, is not undemocratic. It is anti-democratic. We are up against... What we are up against is a new form of nationalism. And it is the most dangerous form of nationalism we've seen on our continent since 1945. It has a flag, an anthem, it's building an army, an air force, a navy. It already has a police force. It already has the power to overrule our parliaments, to overrule our courts. They are determined to build a United States of Europe, and they couldn't give a damn what the peoples of Europe think. They will build it. And it's dangerous because just look at what is happening in Greece today. I know we've got terrible problems in Greece. I know the black economy is huge. I know there's all sorts of problems with government spending and people retiring too early and all the rest of it. But the way to solve that is not, as is happening tonight in Athens as we speak, for 3 foreign unelected officials to come into Greece and to tell them what their tax rates may be, to tell them what government spending may be. If you take away from people their ability to determine their own future, if you put them under foreign occupied power, they will rebel against it. And my fear is what is being done to the pride of the Greeks and their nation may well lead to a revolution. That is just how dangerous this project is. And we can't tame the monster, we can't appease the monster, we've got to kill the monster and do it for us and for the rest of Europe too. Yeah, okay.
I don't actually think it's good news for you if MPs in the major parties accept your arguments, because there'll then be less need to vote for UKIP.
Well, that, of course, madam, is exactly why they're doing it. That's exactly why they're doing it. They're trying to neutralise UKIP. But they can't do that all the while their leaderships take completely the opposite position. And actually, it may go the other way. Because what may be happening here is they may be raising the expectations of the British public. If they raise the expectation that somehow something radical is going to change, and nothing radical does change, then I think people will be even more inclined to vote UKIP than they were before. I'll give you one example of this. Earlier this year, the issue, I think it was in February, the issue surfaced on the question of votes for prisoners. Now, I mean, I have a view on votes for prisoners. It seems to me that if you've gone to prison and you've lost your liberty for that period of time, it's quite right that you should also lose your democratic rights as well. So to me, the issues are nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And do you remember there was a huge national debate, wasn't there? The papers everywhere, there was a huge debate about votes for prisoners. And David Cameron said that the question made him sick to the bottom of his stomach. And many MPs, in fact the very same people that are saying these things on Europe now, held a debate in the House of Commons. And they had a vote on the question of votes for prisoners. And the British Parliament, the mother of parliaments, voted by a majority of 10 to 1 for prisoners not to have the vote. So people thought, isn't that wonderful? Something's happened. To be told the next day by Kenneth Clarke, the Justice Secretary, that the vote was null and void. So net result is people were even angrier. So I think what we should do is we should welcome those in the other parties who are standing up and genuinely making the same argument that we're making. What the rest of them are doing is they're trying to save their own miserable political careers, and they will be found out. They will be found out, and that is why right now it is imperative to keep UKIP on the march. We've got them on the run, let's keep them there.
Good evening. My name is Keith Martin from New Milton. On the face of it, I'm completely in agreement with coming out of Europe. On your leaflet, it's costing us. We want to control immigration, and I'd go even further and say that we don't want to be dictated by unelected judges. My point, I have a worry. We do an awful lot of export to Europe. Can we be certain that if we come out of Europe, Europe won't impose on us import duties, or are we covered by the agreement that we made to join, the only agreement that we've had a say in, that we can still go ahead under that agreement and not pay any taxes and duties?
I think that that question, whenever the referendum comes, will actually be the key national debate. That will be the question. Because the other side have known for years, as long as they keep us terrified that nobody would do any business with us, then the question of us coming out would never ever raise its head. And it's why Blair and Brown constantly said 3 million jobs depend on our membership of the European Union. But can I just correct you slightly, sir, in terms of words? We're not talking about coming out of Europe. We're talking about divorcing ourselves amicably from political union in the EU. They are very, very different things. You know, coming out of Europe sounds like barbed wire on the beach at Dover and, you know, Dad's army on the cliffs with 303s. We're not talking about that. We're talking about leaving behind political union, regaining self-governance, and actually playing our role in the world, for goodness sake. Whereas as English speakers and all the rest of it, we have those advantages. Now, is the fear that we'd lose jobs, is the fear that they wouldn't want to do business with us a justified one? No, and you know why, above all? Because they sell us far more goods than we sell them. I don't think for a moment that the chief executive of Mercedes is going to say, well, I'm sorry chaps, but if you don't want to be in a political union with us, we won't sell our motor cars in Britain. That won't happen. That won't happen. Fascinatingly, the United Kingdom is the biggest export market in the world for both France and Germany. Second point is, when the common market was being talked about, and when people like my parents thought it was a good idea, we were at the tail end of a post-war period of very high tariffs on manufactured goods. But since the common market, what we've had through GATT and the World Trade Organization is global trade liberalisation. Not on agriculture, I grant you, but on manufactured goods, tariffs across the world have come down to such a level that they're now virtually non-existent. And point number 3, and this is the really important one to directly answer your question. Point number 3 is time and again, when the question has come up, representatives from the European Commission have said, if Britain doesn't want to be part of our union, we will of course have a free trade deal with her. Now, if little countries like Norway and Switzerland can negotiate exactly the same terms of trade with the EU market that we've done, I'm certain we, as their biggest export market, can do it. And just my last comment on this, I'm sorry it's a long answer, but it is a vitally important question. I remember when the Constitution was launched, it was Valéry Giscard d'Estaing that launched the Constitution. And he said, with this document, we will become a global superpower. This, incidentally, on the same day that Peter Hain, as Europe Minister, told the House of Commons it was a mere tidying up exercise. I mean, there you are. And somebody said to Giscard, he said, but the British will never accept a constitution. They'll never accept a full EU foreign policy. They'll never accept an EU army. And Giscard said, if the British cannot accept what the European Union has become, they will be relegated to the status of a country like Switzerland. Meaning, Giscard saw us having a simple free trade deal with the European Union as somehow being demeaning, as somehow being bad for Britain. Giscard, if you're listening right now, I'm all for relegation. We'll have the free trade deal and no more political union. Good questions, actually. They're interesting, very political questions. It's the intelligent part of the world, isn't it?
Derek Tidd from Netley Marsh. The Eurosceptic movement has a long history of being rather split up. There are actually 2 people's pledges on the internet, and I've signed both of them, so my credentials are clear. But I'm just offering you a bit of advice in a way, really. There are 600 seats in Parliament. It's far too much for UKIP to fight all 600 seats. Now, here in New Forest East, we've got a very good Eurosceptic MP who's proved his credentials in Parliament. He's also signed the People's Pledge. And if you stand a candidate against an MP, like Julian Lewis, then you may very well get, if it was a close decision, perhaps a Liberal Democrat Europhile winning that seat. Now that would be a disaster and it would go against what you're aiming for. So why don't you target your MPs, your candidates more, and then go for the Kenneth Clarks and so on, but leave people who have proved themselves, who've signed the People's Pledge, for example, leave those alone.
Well, look, actually, as the years go by, increasingly, it makes little difference who your MP is. As more and more of our national life is decided in Brussels, actually, Westminster becomes reduced to being rather like a glorified local council anyway. So that argument, sir, has less resonance than it would have had 20 years ago. Look, there are going to be an awful lot of people desperate to save their skins. Desperate to save their skins. In the case of Julian Lewis, who in many ways is a very bright, admirable man, but in the case of Julian Lewis, if you examine his record in Parliament, he has voted for increased contributions to the European Union. He has voted for, hang on, which rebellion, how many rebellions has Julian Lewis been part of? Has Julian Lewis stood up? Has Julian Lewis stood up and said, it is time Britain left the European Union and it's time we had a simple free trade agreement with them? Has Julian Lewis done that, or is he a decoy duck? Is he there just to take away Eurosceptic votes? In the last election, sir, in the last election, there were 10 Conservatives and 3 Labour MPs who were standing again for Westminster, who had absolutely clear, unproven track records of standing up bravely and saying the right thing, and we didn't oppose any of them. All right? We didn't oppose any of them. The Douglas Carswells and these people, the genuine ones, I view them as being our friends. I couldn't care less whether they're socialists or free marketeers, because this issue is bigger, much bigger. than any of those questions. So I would say, you know, to someone like Julian Lewis, if he is sincere, if he is genuine, why doesn't he just stand up and say it?
Hello, my name's Bill Pierce. You opened your talk by talking about Jutland. My uncle won the Victoria Cross at Jutland.
Good Lord.
Along with the others of my parents' generation who fought and died in the 2 world wars, he was promised a land fit for heroes. But what in fact happened was they were all ethnically cleansed. They were all Cockneys from East London, which is what I am. And I've been ethnically cleansed in one of Europe's biggest programmes of ethnic cleansing. The New Forest is full of my colleagues who joined the White Flight from East London. So I want to ask you what your stance is on anti-Islamification. The EDL and the BNP seem to have grabbed the limelight there. So what are you doing there?
Okay, well, yes, Battle of Jutland and all that, Victoria Cross, great stuff. Because the last Jutland veteran died, I think, what was it, 2 years ago? Yes. He was Henry Allingham, who was the last survivor of that battle at 112 or whatever it was. Interesting, isn't it, that John Cleese, who has been a very prominent Lib Dem, not somebody that you would think of as being a political hardliner, John Cleese 2 weeks ago said, I've sold up in London, I've moved to Bath, I don't recognise London to be an English city anymore. Right. Yeah. I travel extensively around London, and I'm constantly amazed on tubes and in pubs and wherever I go, I'm constantly amazed by the sheer number of people around me that now don't speak English. I am completely stunned with the figure that in Newham, in the borough of Newham,
my old town.
Right, okay, in the borough of Newham, 78% of children who attend primary schools don't have English as a first language. 78%. So what has happened, and there's been a consensus on this, just as there was a consensus on the European question, there has been a consensus amongst Labour, Lib Dems and Conservatives that we have an open door. And I'm not dealing with Islam specifically here, I'm talking in general about the open door immigration policy. We've had since 2004, an unlimited open door to the whole of Eastern Europe. And now, because of social security changes, you can come here from Warsaw tomorrow and claim job seekers allowance from day one. It is absolute, total and utter madness. And I am contemptuous of our political class for doing this to people. Of course, it doesn't affect them, does it? Doesn't affect them. Actually, for them, it's very good. It's cheap chauffeurs, isn't it? It's cheap gardeners. It's cheap nannies. No, it is. But if you deal with what we traditionally would call the white working class, for them, actually having a massive oversupply in the labour market has been absolutely catastrophic. Now, the way we approach this, and I did say in my speech, you know, we want nothing to do with the EDL or the BNP or the politics of hatred. That's not what we're about. What we're about is putting our own people first. And interestingly, you'll find many members of the settled ethnic minorities in this country who agree with our policies on immigration even more strongly than we do. Because they're settled, they're doing well, they don't want the whole thing riven with terrible social division. So let's just get this clear. You know, we think one of the worst things that's happened in London, the Tories probably even worse than Labour, is every few years or so, we say there's another couple of 100,000 illegal immigrants or failed asylum seekers, we're going to give them an amnesty. There have been 4 major amnesties since the early 1990s. And of course, all that does is send a message to the rest of the world, as Leslie Crowther would have said, come on down, you know, the price is right. So our policy on this is very, very simple. Of course we want people with skills, who've got jobs and services and talent they can offer to this country to come here on work permit schemes. But we think there should be no immigration into this country, no settlement in this country for a period of up to 5 years whilst we can work out just how much of a mess we're in. Do you know, every sheep in this country now has to be microchipped. We know exactly how many sheep there are in this country. We don't know within 2 million how many people there are in this country. It's a shambles, and frankly, you know, we are seeing the ghettoisation of our cities and towns, and that's bad news. Because actually, you know, you come from the East End, as you know, we've always had migrant groups coming into the country. And that's never been a great problem. The problem is if a whole neighbourhood or area is taken over by what is seen to be a completely different culture. On the question of Islamification, I think we have to do a bit more, probably starting in our schools, to actually teach people of the values of our Judeo-Christian culture, the good that it's done, and all that it's represented over centuries. Because I'm getting a bit tired of my kids coming home from school being taught about every other religion in the world, celebrating every other religious holiday, but not actually being taught about Christianity. Maybe sacking the Archbishop of Canterbury and getting somebody decent would be good. There are over 20 police forces now in this country that turn a complete blind eye to the operation of Sharia courts and Sharia law. If you're not prepared as a nation from the top down to stand up for your cultures and your values, then those cultures and values will be threatened. And it's one of the ways in which I just have this huge admiration for what the Aussies have done over the last 20 years. I really do. I really do. They want people to go and live in Australia who will accept their customs, accept their culture, bring value to their country, and I agree with that. And if you listen to what John Howard and other PMs have said over the last 10 years, in the case of Islam, he said to them, you're welcome. You're welcome to come here and to have your children here and to bring them up as Australians. But if you're coming to take us over, you're not welcome. We need a little bit more backbone, do we not? In our church, in our police force, in our parliament.
Any more?
I'll do a couple more. I mean, they're still coming, so.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. My name is Nadine O'Connor, and I'm the campaign director of Fathers for Justice. So just do come in peace this evening. I'd like you to take off your MEP hat, if I may, and ask you to put on your leader's hat. On 2 occasions leading up to the last election, I stood in front of David Cameron as I'm stood in front of you this evening, and he made me very specific promises. I don't know if everybody is aware, I campaign for fathers' rights and actually families' rights in the family law
Good for you.
This country. And actually, 2 weeks ago, I agreed a joint press release with the Conservative Party at the time regarding changes to family law reform. And it's going to be no surprise, but they did a U-turn on those specific promises. Now, I have been to probably more MPs' meetings than most people in this room, and I've got to the point, I'm afraid, where I have seen and heard it all before. And I've been through your website with a fine-tooth comb, as you would imagine. And I'm a little bit concerned that while your expertise and knowledge and passion for Europe is unquestionable, they're still lacking a few areas of what I call domestic issues that you could be putting together policies on. Do you have any specific policies on the family? Because we know that has a massive impact financially on this country, with family breakdown and social breakdown as well.
Thank you, Nadine. I must say, when Fathers for Justice kicked off, I thought they had an unwinnable case and argument. They rather blew it, didn't they, with some of their publicity stunts. So I can see in you that they've clearly got a more refined approach to the whole thing, so they might do better. I think two things to say. Firstly, I'm not surprised they've U-turned. We talked in this meeting about some of the stigmas, some of the areas that people don't want to talk about. You know, don't discuss immigration, it makes you nasty. Don't talk about Europe, otherwise people will think you're weird. But one of the big ones is, don't talk about the family.
Yes.
Don't talk about the family. We mustn't cause offence to single mothers or whatever else it may be. And again, it's really rather similar to the previous question, Bill's question. It's this collective lack of will to stand up and say that the family actually is very, very important indeed. It is better for children if the parents stay together, but if they don't stay together, it's equally important for those children to have rights of access to both parents, to give them a chance of being brought up in a balanced and sensible way. So I am emotionally very much with your campaign. I have been divorced once in my life, and there were 2 children in that marriage, all right? So, you know, this is an issue. Luckily for me, my ex-wife and I had no difficulties in finding a sensible reciprocal arrangement, and thankfully for me, it worked very well. Had it gone to the courts, I doubt I would have had such freedom of access to my children that I enjoyed through a private arrangement. So I am emotionally absolutely with your campaign. I think there is a strong, unwinnable argument there, and if, as you say, our policy development may not be complete in all areas, but it is much better before we publish things on websites to actually think things through and get them right, and I would welcome input from you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there many more hands up or not? No. No, okay, right, that's the last one.
This will be the last question, unless anybody else has one or two. No.
No.
Okay. This will be the last question.
What is your views on building on the countryside?
Well, now, I did give you a list of promises that Cameron made, didn't I? I forgot one of them, didn't I? And that was his speech to the Council for the Protection of Rural England that he made in 2008 when he said the Green Belt was safe. With this government's policies, the Green Belt can't be safe, can it? Number one, they want to build crackpot, useless, ugly windmills everywhere. Because, of course, they want us to meet European targets. And now let's cut absolutely to the quick. Why do we need to build so many new houses? Any guesses here? Well, you see, I mean, don't take it from me, but Sir Andrew Green, who runs Migration Watch, a very, very well-respected think tank, makes the point that just to deal with migration alone, we have to build 300 new houses every single day. You will not be hearing that from our Prime Minister or our Deputy Prime Minister or the millipede that leads the Labour Party. They don't want to talk about these issues, all right? I have to say, we mustn't be people that stand in the way of all development for the sake of it. And there are clearly arguments that there are many rural villages that actually, with a couple of hundred more houses, might again support a shop. So there are arguments for sensible, real development. There are even stronger arguments for dealing with the over 500,000 empty properties in our towns and cities. And perhaps if we had a grip on law and order, people might want to go back and live in those towns and cities. So there are no simple answers to this, but I do think, when I talked earlier about that breach of trust that we have with career politics, maybe the biggest of all amongst Conservative voters will be that it's their own Prime Minister who appears to be happy to have a planning free-for-all across this whole country. This is my last question. This is the end of my little performance this evening. It's been quite a long day, one way and another, having been up at 5, not as tough as the Battle of Jutland, but I was up at 5 o'clock leaving Jutland earlier on this morning. And I just want to finish by saying that, you know, the first question that I was asked this evening by Brian is how am I different to the other bastards. Listen, whether you agree with everything UKIP stands for or not, whether we can improve some aspects of our presentation, I'm sure we can do all of those things. But what I want you all here to really understand is we are absolutely committed to putting the interests of this country first. We have been betrayed by a career class of politicians in all three parties, and we need to threaten them. We need, in many cases, to wipe them away for the damage they've done to this country. Let's get back our independence. Let's get back our pride.